அடிக்கின கூட்டுக்கு ஆடுபட்ட மக்கா மரப்பு மேட்டுக்கார வேர்வத்தனி சொக்கா. Good morning, folks. I'm not sure if everyone can hear me. Hopefully we're good. No more technical difficulties there. Everyone's been able to get into the link with the new email that was just sent. First and foremost, everyone welcome. Second Tamil Leader Speaker Series discussion. My name is Valersa, and I'm the Director of Social Engagement here at Aravanai. First, thank you all for tuning in at different time zones all over the world. Our mission is to only share knowledge to aspiring entrepreneurs in underprivileged communities and make it inclusive. That's why we have planned out 10 inspirational discussions for the entire year of 2021. Watch out for the next discussion that we have in April. For this, I would like to welcome Rajan, the chair of Aravanai, that will give us a bit more info about our organization.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me well. Please do forgive us for the technical difficulties in starting the event on time. And I wanted to quickly give an overview of Aravanai and what we are trying to do. Let me go ahead and share the screen. Sorry about that. Okay, there are some technical difficulties again on my end, but I'll keep going. I just want to give you background around Aravanai. Aravanai started in 2017 in Toronto to mobilize the diaspora Tamil leaders to help empower underprivileged communities in Sri Lanka, predominantly the northeast of Sri Lanka, and with an aligned vision of making Jaffna being the next Silicon Valley, and then drive, I guess, building local capacity in the northeast to go towards that Silicon Valley goal and dream. Aravanai is a child organization of ITEE Foundation based out of Bay Area. Again, collectively, the goal is to empower the underprivileged communities in three aspects. One is education, entrepreneurship, and then which both leads to employment. We partner with similar-minded organizations on the ground to get these achieved. Without going into further details, we have a lot of these information available on aravanai.org. Feel free to go look at them, and you will hear more about it going forward. But in order to keep progressing, I would like to invite one of our media partners, CTPA, Canadian Tamil Professional Association. They've been working with us from the beginning of the event series, and they will be working with us towards the end of the year. I'd like to bring on board Dusha to give a I guess brief introduction of CTPA and how they're going to be partnering with us.
Hi everyone, my name is Dusha and I am the head of partnerships with the Canadian Tamil Professionals Association. CTPA is a non-profit organization focused on developing career opportunities for Tamil professionals through professional networking, development, and mentorship. CTPA addresses the needs of Canadian Tamil professionals, both emerging and established, by creating a community-based platform that connects our members and provides them with valuable career development resources. We were first established back in 2008, and we're actually in our 13th year now. And for as long as CTPA has existed, the mandate has been to provide Tamil professionals with tools, training, and resources that maximize their potential and aid with their success. Today, we continue to shape the future of Tamil professionals with innovative, forward-thinking programs that advance and support their profession at every stage of their career. This includes PALM, CTPA's membership program that connects emerging and established Canadian professionals in the Tamil community. And to date, we have paired 130 mentees and mentors and have just recently opened our application portal for this year. More information regarding our PALM program and other initiatives, including our annual Toast to Success event, the I Am a Tamil Professional campaign, and many other webinar and workshop registration can be found on our website, tamilprofessional.ca, and our social media platforms. We are so happy to join today as a social media partner for this Tamil Leader Speaker Series because it truly does align with our mission, which is to foster professional development by facilitating powerful conversations, creating opportunities, and inspiring future leaders. From the speakers to the moderators, Aravanai has been spotlighting many great individuals within our Canadian Tamil community, and we are very excited for today's discussion. And without further ado, I'm going to be passing it back to Larissa.
Hi, thank you once again for that introduction. Next, I want just to introduce Kirthana, who will be moderating our discussion today.
Hi, all. I just wanted to introduce Kitana, who's going to be moderating the discussion. Kirthana, I'd like to introduce Kitana from her background. Kitana is a journalist at CBC Toronto and producer at CBC Radio. She wears many hats in the newsroom. She's a reporter, producer, newsreader, and storyteller. She joined CBC Toronto after completing her master's in journalism at University of British Columbia and a bachelor's honors from the University of Windsor. She has worked as a business journalist in Vancouver and Ottawa. Her expertise is in high-impact journalism at CBC News, including a recent stories on stopping domestic violence and a series on abuse in amateur sports in Canada. Kitana has worked across Ontario as a reporter, including Thunder Bay, Sudbury, Hamilton, and Kitchener-Waterloo. Now, she's the better candidate to create this impact, social impact, in terms of carrying back to the northeast of Sri Lanka to enable a Silicon Valley. And with that in mind, I would like to hand over to Kitana to take over from me and then continue the discussion. Thank you for joining us, Kitana, today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rajan. What an honor it is to be here, to work with Aravanai, to work with all of you, to have an amazing discussion. And what an honor it is for all of us to have Travis join us today. So I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Travis Ratnam. Travis is the CEO of Knowledgehook and is passionate about building educational tools that are more accessible for students, teachers, and parents. Knowledgehook was inspired by his own struggle with math as a kid. Knowledgehook is used by school districts across North America and is backed up by many international investors. Knowledgehook has raised over $20 million to date. Travis was brought up in Scarborough, Ontario, and went to the University of Waterloo for electrical engineering. After graduation, he joined Microsoft as a product manager. Soon after he completed his MBA at Queen's, Travis started Knowledgehook. So without further ado, I am excited to bring Travis on board. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you, Kirthana. Thank you for having me, everyone.
Amazing. Okay, Travis, so I'm really excited. I just kind of want to get into this discussion if you're ready to go.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's kind of take it back. Let's take it back for when you started. I think when it comes to developing a product and seeing it to market, of course, there's a lot of hesitation around this. There's fears. There's also a lot of excitement. But you've been able to achieve this, and I'd love for you to give us a brief of your story. How did you start to build your brand of Knowledgehook? We know that you kind of you started it with your own struggle with math, but how did you begin?
Yeah, for me, it wasn't an immediate transition from, going from a sort of the normal career track and shifting to starting a company, there was just a few key moments in my journey where I started to slowly realize, okay, this is going to be the thing that I want to spend all my time working on and solving. For me, as you mentioned, I struggled in math. Um, you know, my father was a math tutor back in Sri Lanka, came from a relatively modest family. And I grew up hearing this story about how they couldn't afford to send my dad to math tutoring. So he taught himself math, borrowed everyone else's tuition books back in Sri Lanka, taught himself math, and became a relatively well-known tutor at the age of 13 in Sri Lanka. And so I had him for a father, so I was very fortunate. Because I struggled across every subject in school, my dad taught me math. My mom essentially quit her job and became a stay-at-home mom to help with schooling for myself and my sisters, predominantly triggered by my continued struggle in school. And so this was sort of the backdrop that I never knew coming, like looking back now, I never knew was going to be the fuel for, that I would need to pursue something like Knowledgehook. So I went through school, eventually started to do well in math, and went on to, I went literally from the bottom of, in terms of grades and performance, from the bottom of my class to eventually graduating in high school at the top of my class and going on to do engineering. And fast forward to, graduating in engineering school, I had an offer from Apple and Microsoft. And I share this because when you struggle in school, and in my case bullied a bit for struggling, you develop an imposter syndrome, which carried right through university and carried right through in my career. And so in fact at Microsoft, I actually looking back, remember just vividly how empty my office was. And usually you're given an office space to decorate, to put a couch, a lamp, and your family photos. But I never really settled. I was like a visitor. It's like it's a matter of time before they figured out that I don't belong here. So this was kind of my experience. But at Microsoft, when I finally I actually solved this a problem, which at the time was the number one problem affecting Microsoft support calls for Microsoft Word, and got a lot of recognition. And in that moment, I said, hey, I can come up with things that others haven't thought about. And all the people who were in a position to think about it were in this building. And this was like a huge revelation for me. And I love building things. That's why I was a product manager there in the first place. And then I started reading biographies and said, okay, well, hey, there's this, what's like, if for me, I started to get exposed to building a company. I started getting exposed to other things as well in terms of making an impact, social impact. And so I knew I wanted to make a social impact at this point. I knew I wanted to build something of value. And I slowly started to eventually realize, as I left Microsoft to start my MBA, I wanted to do this in education, and it was likely going to be in ed tech. So I pursued the MBA thinking it was going to help me with the build an ed tech company. So I'm fast forwarding, and then eventually coming out of that, the previous speaker, Bhaskar, who we had the pleasure of hearing, sent me an article called Search versus Execute that came out of the Valley about the process of product market fit. Read that, and fortunately read it at the right time to understand how serial entrepreneurs pursue building a company, and then began my journey to figuring out what it was in EdTech. So Knowledgehook was the third attempt of a 3-part attempt at the bat in EdTech.
Wow.
First one was MCAT. The second one was in university prep testing called Prepaholic, and the third one was Knowledgehook.
I want to jump on something that you said, because I was kind of planning to get this later, but I like that you've kind of started the conversation. Imposter syndrome. No, everyone would say that it's not real, or there's a lot of brushing off of the term. Can you explain to us, when did you kind of identify, like it sounds like you kind of identified that you had imposter syndrome when you were at Microsoft, but how did you move past that imposter syndrome? How did you start to build that own confidence in yourself that you can make it in business as its own industry, but also as an entrepreneur yourself?
To be honest, I didn't think I really, I didn't know what that word existed until in Knowledgehook, somewhere along the line, in building Knowledgehook, my co-founders told our mentors about my story, and they called it imposter syndrome, and they're the ones who brought it to my attention. So I had a tough time even sharing this story. It was very emotional for me. So I got used to being able to, okay, they said you have to tell this story. It's like, it's part of what's driving you. It's like, oh, okay. And so, but I did though develop tools without even knowing that there was a word for this imposter syndrome. I did start developing tools right from my early journey as a child that played useful at Microsoft and onward. And it was just this constant feedback loop of looking at my errors and my mistakes and collecting feedback in different ways and testing things out. And this constant iterative, like studying my own, what I thought, I was stupid. So studying my own stupidity and trying to analyze it and collect feedback and create an environment where everyone felt really comfortable sharing their feedback. And sometimes they were wrong, or I thought maybe they missed the mark there, but I wouldn't necessarily tell people that. I would just constantly, just like a gravitational pull, just collect as much and sift through it. So that was a helpful tool for me.
Okay.
That,
wow.
yeah.
I want to talk about, when I was reading your bio, I noticed the trajectory of reading your bio said, you completed your MBA at Queen's and then started Knowledgehook. But I want to understand, how much of an asset is an MBA and those learned skills in your MBA? Did you find that it actually helped you get to where you wanted to be, especially now with Knowledgehook?
So the MBA helped with my imposter syndrome, certainly, but not so much in the first phase of building the company. It's much more helpful now, but I think you don't necessarily need an MBA to start a company. An MBA doesn't guarantee that you will succeed in starting or leading or managing a company, but the whatever in the MBA is a really great way to pause your career and learn about other aspects of building a company. But for starting a company, it's actually very not useful. I had to, so I had to, and this was perhaps a skill that I got really good at, which is like to learn something new. I like to use this analogy called like our P brain, which is our working memory, which is the brain that likes to learn things. I call it the P brain just because it really like helps people picture how small and simple it is, because it's the smartest part of our overall brain, and it's essentially where we learn new things. So when you learn to drive for the first time, we're always like, we were nervous, if you recall, and we can't multitask. But now, as we're driving, and especially as we're arriving home, like we can do, it's almost autopilot. How did that happen? How did we go from freaking out the first time we learned to drive to, being on autopilot? It's because the first time we learned to drive, we were using our P brain. And then as we got better and better, it started to go into what's called our long-term memory, which is our larger brain. And so one of the things that happens is when you learn something new, it's exhausting. And it's you put all this effort to learn it. And so you want to make use of it. And one of the things I got relatively good at is going through that exhausting process of learning something new and then putting it on the shelf and saying, okay, this is not useful right now. Big mistake, but let's not just continue down this path simply because it's not useful right now. It'll be useful later. And then what's this new thing? And in this case, it was the article from Basker about serial entrepreneurship. It's like, oh my God, I have to actually ignore everything I just learned and spend money on. So I got to do this thing here. And I started to pursue product market fit, which is what even Basker talked about. And I'm more than happy to talk about as well.
Okay, awesome. And we'll definitely get into that. So, I mean, I think that was a good transition to it. So how does one find a product that's right for the market, especially when it seems like that product, a similar product saturates the market at the moment?
I'd love to answer that question, but I was going to ask a sort of preface a little bit before that, which is for anyone looking to start a company, anyone who is pursuing that right now, I find that there's like three potential missteps one can take that you want to avoid before you begin the journey of product market fit or searching for a product and build or the process of product market fit. And the three mistakes you can make potentially is to assume like success of building a company is a lot like school, like in terms of going from one grade to another. You know, when you go through school, it feels like you're on an escalator and the escalator is just moving you up and up and up. But really, the reality is building the especially the early days of building a company. It's actually the opposite of going up and up and up. It looks like you're digging a hole. It looks like you're going into, let's say, the bottom of the ocean, and that's an important thing to note, because you're not going to see traditionally like what is traditionally viewed as success. You're not going to see that right away, and so you have to be able to know how to measure your success along the way. And that comes to the other thing that you probably should do as an entrepreneur if you're starting a company, which is the vast majority of, and this is in the article Search versus Execute, the vast majority of businesses is almost like a different sport. I'm going to use the analogy of cricket versus baseball. They look roughly the same. It's a ball and a stick, but it's fundamentally a different sport. And the vast majority of large companies are, let's say let's just for argument's sake, they're playing baseball, and and starting a company in the beginning, it's actually cricket. And so often people who cannot tell the difference between those two things might offer advice without realizing that it's fundamentally different from like the advice you need as a founder. And so my advice to other founders is to find other people who have gone through that journey, like Basker and others, and to listen to their journey in that early stage. And you'll feel it's as subtle, the subtleties between cricket and baseball, or anyone knowing the sports knows like it's a big difference. But an alien might say that's a ball and a stick, if they're visiting planet Earth. And often that's one of the biggest mistakes in terms of founders, is listening to their MBA or listening to large company expertise. In the early days, literally looks the same, but it's literally different. And finally, the last one is coming back to the analogy of going into the water. A lot of times I find two types of founders that I often try to, when I volunteer time to like mentor back and give back, I find two kinds of founders. I find a founder that's wearing a snorkel versus a founder that's wearing scuba gear. And when you are hoping for a quick buck or a quick exit or a quick return in the early days, the sad part is even if you had all the money in the world, you have to still, like, the only thing you don't have is the ability to figure out the answer of what this business is going to look like right away, no matter how much money you pour into something. So often it's not about how much money you can invest into your company. It's actually how much time and love and patience can you spend in learning this each time and iterate. And that process, you need scuba gear to go into the bottom of the ocean. If you imagine if you're trying to be a founder and you're trying to go to the bottom of the coral reef and you're wearing snorkels, right? You could be a smart person, really talented, but if you don't have enough oxygen to go down, you're going to head back up. And so this is all about time. And so what is the oxygen for a founder? You have to ignore external metrics of success that society usually values. You have to be truly passionate about the problem, and you have to find creative ways to just stay alive, not creative ways to find money to scale it, but to stay alive for a long period, like 3 to 5 years, where you really get ahead of understanding a problem and potential solution before the market sees it. And so that's kind of my advice before you get started. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I'm glad that you covered that now. I mean, I think I do have to say, I think people might be looking at you and say you are so successful, and because you're kind of that poster child for someone that's created a product, found that market that found that product that. But I kind of want to ask, is that the case? Do you have to be an expert at something in order to see it through and have that development? Is there ever a learning curve that you're allowed?
Oh, 100%. In fact, I have no business being in education. If you think about it, I'm not a professional teacher. I've never set foot professionally in a district. A lot of teachers haven't even set foot in a district, and yet Knowledgehook is, really, we're very proud to say we're thought leaders among district leaders. And so there's a ton of learning that you have to do to all the way, even now. And in my mind, like even as you say expert, my imposter syndrome kicks in, or success, because there's still a long way to go for us to
Right.
achieve our goals. And so I certainly think the beautiful thing about the word expert is it often means you've built some knowledge about historical patterns of the world that allow you to be able to predictably do something in the future. But often the
Right.
future it's like a dim view of the past, and it's often always changing. And so there's
Mm.
this huge, like beautiful, bountiful land of just things to be discovered. And the key to, you kind of hit on it, is you just have to be curious, you have to be passionate, and you have to be willing to learn how maybe this problem that, exists in some area that you care about, and, and some new emerging technologies, or, methods, or combining two different industries in a way that hadn't been combined, could potentially offer a new way of solving the problem, a new type of solution. And you have to just be passionate every day to like experiment and test. And as you run experiments, you discover new ideas and new insights, like, oh wow, this worked. One of them will work out of the 10 that failed, and all of a sudden you are now the only one who knows about it because you tried something
Right.
really new. So technically, I guess you can say you're an expert at that moment in that specific
Right.
thing. And that's the process that you keep building on, and I have to continue to do that every day.
Awesome. Awesome. So I know we're also streaming on Facebook now. So welcome to everyone that's joining us on Facebook. Travis, if I can ask you also if you could look at your camera, because I think more people want to see you. And so now that we have our larger audiences coming in and they have tons of questions, so that's perfect. That's a great view. I want to talk about something that's really important, because I think when it comes to product development, when it comes to starting a business, creating something, we are often afraid of failure. So how important is failure when deciding to create and offer something?
See, this is a great question. And I use that cricket versus baseball analogy. Because in one sport, both almost, for someone who's completely learning about both sports at the same time, they might think they're the same sport, but obviously those who play the sports know the difference. But there's certain activities in cricket that might appear as a failure in baseball, and there's certain activities in baseball that might appear as a failure if you were to do that in cricket. And the thing to understand and is to ignore so let's assume cricket is the founder's game and baseball is the game that you play once you have a business and you scale. The things to ignore as a founder is to ignore the baseball players, right? Where the baseball players are, in this case, failure is actually the key ingredient the founder has to like experience every day quickly to be able to uncover something that no one in the world has thought of. And so you have to play your sport. And so the best way to do that is constantly look for people who've started something from the get-go, from scratch, and have gone through that journey, and just listen to them. And often founders aren't necessarily presenters and charismatic communicators. They were busy building their companies or trying to. Even those who've tried and failed or had marginal success has a ton of insight than someone, let's say, who's oversees a large organization. I like to call another analogy I use is builders versus pilots. When our car breaks down, like, we don't really assume that we can go in and fix it. We go find a mechanic. But often in large organizations, sometimes you find folks who who don't know the distinction between, I was here when the organization was a certain size and I'm piloting it, versus I can actually build one of these organizations from scratch. And that distinction is important for founders. It's actually absolutely critical to find folks who've gone through that journey. And you find that journey is often a very soul journey, like a lonely one, maybe you and another co-founder, but only you will be the expert in what your area is. as you develop your own understanding of it and you run your experiments. But other founders will try to teach you the process, but they'll never really stick their nose in and tell you that you're wrong or right about your specific idea. They can show you the process to discover whether you're wrong or right and let the market show you. And that's the journey of product market fit. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And I also wanted to say, everyone's really enjoying your analogies. So keep them up. I think it's a nice takeaway, because your cricket versus baseball, builders versus pilots. I think it's helping people frame and visualize what this journey is like. Could you explain to us in a little bit more detail, what are some of the challenges that you faced when you were first coming up with Knowledgehook? Anything stand out that you feel really needs to be told?
Yeah. I mean, I'll try to tie it back to like how it might be relevant to others going through this journey. The first thing's a product market fit. It's very, very lonely, right? And if you have loved ones, nobody wants to see. Someone is at the front door. Sorry. If you have loved ones, nobody wants to see you, go through this struggle. And so it's very painful to actually watch your loved ones watch you, and also you wanting to help them, and now you're going through this journey and hoping that it pays out for you in other ways as well, so they can support your family and others. So that part of the journey is a really tough one. And one of the things I advise, and there's a second thing I want to share, but this is the first one, is, let's say you're planning a trip, right? And then you are going to visit a friend, 5 or 10 minutes away from you. You might casually tell your family or friends, your loved ones, hey, who you live with, hey, I'm just going to go down the street. Right. But let's say you're planning a trip and you're going to travel for a day, like 18 hours or a whole day of driving or whatever. And you're going to probably plan a longer trip, right? You're going to package food, get some clothes, have a longer conversation about what to do during that time, have checkpoints, and let your family members, if they're joining you for that ride, if they're partly going to be make that sacrifice. The decision is being made collectively for that long journey. And often what happens with founders is they'll make the decision for themselves, but they forgot to communicate the way they would plan for a long trip with their loved ones. And you're often, when you do these things, you're doing it because you are passionate, and passion comes from your love for being part of the world, being part of humanity. And so if your loved ones are suffering because you didn't have the conversation about a long trip that you're planning, that's not very helpful. So try to have conversations and understand the journey is one with you and whoever else is dependent on you, and make sure that at the end, you don't want, if you succeed but you don't have them around, it kind of sucks. And so it's one of those things that I advise. That helps. That's another part of the scuba gear. It's like having those conversations and having those checkpoints. The other thing that happens in a founder's journey for product market fit is it's incredibly lonely, right? And sometimes you just want someone to be able to give you a pat on the back, like an investor or a business person who has a lot of experience, or a client. And sometimes, it can be a bit distracting when you go for that pat on the back. It's a bit of a moth to a flame, that type of feedback. And the reason I try to mentor founders is, don't listen to the pat on the backs or even the criticism of what people say verbally, but listen to what your customer is doing with your product or solution or your prototype. Look at the habit that is potentially forming or could form as you put your idea into the world and people play around with it. The actual client. Don't even listen to what your client is saying. Watch what your client is doing and interacting with your prototype. And the faster you can get to prototyping and then throwing that prototype away, learning something and then throwing it away and learning something new, and watching the human behavior form in your market based on your entry into the market, the faster you can get to that. And as often as you can throw it away and try again, the better for you. And the more you can sort of navigate that loneliness, and while it's on occasion you're going to, I myself did, want that pat on the back, know that that's not a marker of success, whether it's an investment or family members or anything saying, I believe in you, or a client saying, I love your presentation deck. Okay, that's nice. But will they use the product that you prototype? So even if they say, I don't like you or I don't believe in you, even that doesn't matter. What matters is how fast can you test your idea.
Wow. Okay. I think that's a great response. I think that's very, very powerful. I think we're always kind of in need of, I know for sure, even I am. Sometimes it just you're in need of that pat on the back just to keep you moving forward. But if you can internalize that and know that you yourself are doing something worth it at the end of the day, you'll get all the pats on the back. Let's talk about, you touched on this briefly, but I want to dive into it a little bit more. When it comes to building a company, providing a product, what's more important? I want to kind of frame this correctly. Is it immediate growth and making money, or working on the product regardless of how long it takes? And I think that last part, regardless of how long it takes, I ask because if you're not seeing an income come in, how long can something sustain?
Yeah, ultimately, like, you know, that's a great question. Wow, I have to pause and think about it. It's because there's also a way. There is a point at which you want, like, part of the journey of building a product, I think, is asking the question of, will someone pay for this? Is there a value in the solution you have? So it's a really great question, because like there's a lot of nuance to the response. I'm advocating, especially through product market fit, of not looking for the number of dollars and the scaling of dollars, in year 2, year 3, year 4, as soon as you get started. Rather, the quality of the dollar that a customer is giving, meaning it's the quality of revenue. So it could be $10, but they love your product, and it's like that person represents a market of people who have a similar problem, and they love it, and they're actually advocating and sharing it, and they're coming back and renewing. That's a high quality $10 versus like $1 million in your first year of launching, or a year into launching, but people are basically leaving year 2, year 3, but you're putting more marketing dollars, raising that capital, and you're growing. That's not a good company, because the quality of the revenue, you're bleeding on the back end and other things, is not that great. And yeah, so that's kind of the best way I can sort of articulate. You do want to think about money in terms of how it fits the equation. If you're choosing to build a company, like, there's different instruments you can do to make a social impact. You can go into public policy, you can go into social activism, launch a non-for-profit. I actually considered that, believe it or not, before starting Knowledgehook. I wasn't sure which one I was going to do. I was talking to my wife about this the other day. It was like, literally, it was a toss-up. And then I went into Knowledgehook. But then when you pick up that instrument, it's like, okay, well, there's a that particular instrument, to be able to do what you love to do, you have to get paid. And so you have to find a way to create value that is so valuable that it can do that. So certainly you have to think about that as part of the larger equation, but the important thing is to not confuse this hockey stick growth and those conversations. And product market fit, you can play the 3 to 5 year R&D long game until you get these healthy metrics in place. I say 5 years because I always like to buffer more than what you anticipate. Ideally, it comes out in 3 years. But and you're picking something that may not be popular today, but will be popular 10 years out. That's usually the ideal environment to build a company, because there's no big giant trying to wait for your idea to pop out and then copy you, because they're just not thinking about that market. So those are other elements as well.
Okay, that's great. That's very, very great advice. Let's talk a little bit about customer acquisition, retention, and growth. How do you bring them in? But more importantly, how do you get them to stay?
Yeah, so we had to, like, we could have, like, for the first, like, early R&D period of Knowledgehook, like, we had a log. If you went to knowledgehook.com, it was just a login, and we had two boards. Yeah, we had 2 boards, and we never and had they offered year 2, I think year 1 or year 2 they started paying. And we could have scaled, but we just focused on one grade and constantly iterated on the product. And they were willing to invest for that area. And so this is literally like I lived exactly the thing I suggested we do, and I'm so glad that we did, because you know, in that period, like we could have scaled, but we didn't. We could have added more to the product and get more revenue, but we didn't. We kept iterating. Sorry, the question again was?
It was more along the lines of how do you bring in customers,
Right.
but then how do you get them to stay? How do you, you know, there might be another shiny product on this, you know, in the market. How do you get them to stay with you?
So okay, so this is a great question. So one of the things you have to really invest in is a deep, uh, you know, like really create a compelling product, and that's one that they you know, want to use to solve a problem, and there's no real great alternative. There was a really good book that I had read called Blue Ocean Strategy, and it uses this really great analogy of, you know, red ocean versus blue ocean. If you're competing in a market space where it's a Me Too product, you know, it's a red ocean, it's bloody. But if you can figure out something that others have not thought of and enter a new type of experience that people that cannot get anywhere, that's a blue ocean, and so it gives you a head start. Cirque du Soleil it was one of the examples they use in that book. And if you think about what Cirque du Soleil is, it's a circus, but it's also like a theatrical Broadway experience. And so it's not competing with the big circuses because it's not quite a circus. And it's not competing with a Broadway theatrical musical because it's not quite that either. So part of your journey as you're trying to create this value for the customer is it unique value? Can they get this somewhere else, right? And so you're trying to solve their problem. In this case, our case, it was using technology. So we were trying to create value. And one of the problems we had to solve was student engagement. If kids are not enjoying math homework, that's a problem that teachers wanted to solve. So we had to solve that. Then at the same time, another problem was the quality of the content. Online tech tools were creating communities where you can create your own content. We realized, like, if we want to solve this problem in math education, we needed this. So I reached out to people who are from the publishing industry, brought them on, and there were moments where the entire team was like co-founders were off payroll, and the publishing writer was the only one getting a paycheck, so that we can actually create the content. So we were looking at the problem and also looking at a way that, relative to everyone else looking at the problems of edtech, was unique. And because we were looking at the unique aspects of this and looking for a unique solution, there was no other compelling solution in the market. And so that process began. And then I saw another problem, like the kids like me who were struggling at the back of the classroom weren't necessarily moved by all the things we did. That's when I realized, a really great teacher could actually make a big difference. And I noticed the districts were actually, trying to unlock the full potential of every teacher by training them and teaching them new methods. And they were doing it without technology. And that's what gave birth to Knowledgehook's full concept, the instructional guidance system. We started finding the people who wrote those books, got them to work with us to build out a full tech platform that did all of these things. So really focusing on the right customers. Once you start to see there's something here, see if anyone else is focusing on that customer the way you're focusing on their problem. If you're the only one thinking about their problem in the way that uniquely, you're most likely to come up with a unique solution that others are doing. So if you have a unique lens into that, would help. And that's kind of the process. And if you do this and you study the habits, are they coming back? Are they going away? Are they renewing? Right? Will they, are they spreading the like good news about your product? Are you seeing engagement? How are they behaving? So kids were like really loving. We'd walk into a classroom and somehow we were celebrities, but it was like there were only two schools using our product, and then we'd walk in to get feedback, and we were like little mini stars. And so this was a sign, right? So this was a great sign that this was working. And so these are little things that are signs of a great brand or potential of a great brand. And and that and renewals. So that's how you know you're going to retain your customers. And now you start to scale, and then you run into all these new other problems we'll talk about. But but that's kind of the early thing that, and you don't want to go to the next gate. You don't want to go from, scale up until you feel you have all those metrics. I was very fortunate. We had our first angel investor, John Abley. He invested, but he also told us to slow down, to focus. And that was the same advice. And yeah, technically we didn't need his capital, but his mentorship meant all the world. And that was the right advice.
Wow, that's awesome. Also, from what you're saying, I wonder, sometimes there's that tension between addressing a unique problem or addressing a unique crowd and keeping your product very broad, and servicing everyone. What's the right fit? Like, how do you know whether you should keep it unique and niche, or you should broaden out?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. So I'm trying to find what's the most common analogy that you can use to do this. So there's dominoes, like the dominoes you can line up and you push one and it knocks down, or like a bowling, when you do bowling and the bowling pins. And so the actual, like, the trick of this is to go niche, but see how this niche solution could then expand into a broader audience. So if you think of Facebook, they started with universities, and then they had a vision of expanding out. Or so you really actually start niche, and the reason you start niche is because you're really honing in on a problem that you're trying to find. Like, you're trying to be the only one caring about the problem in that unique way. And sometimes you have to really pay attention to a small thing. And by niche, I mean, it's not like this, like you don't want to build a computer. Like, it's that seems to be a big, thing. So you want to find something that's extremely unique and niche, and that there's maybe like 1 million people that you can target, or 10 million. Like, so one metric they use is 10 million in revenue in a local market, which is too small for, and that's, I'm speaking in American dollars, but 10 million in ARR, annual recurring revenue, in a local market, it might, for a software company, is small enough that the big giants won't pay attention, and enough for you to get your first bowling pin knocked down, or the first domino knocked down. But you have a vision of, like, if I go from here, I can go here, and this, and these other local markets, and then eventually I can expand my product and go after this. And so that's usually the name of the game.
Okay, that's good. I like that. I'm glad we asked that question. Oftentimes when we're working at something for so long, we may sometimes lose faith in it, or even in ourselves. How do you get past that hurdle? Is there ever a right time or necessary time to put something aside?
Yeah, that I don't think there is a single person that's walked on this earth that has not felt that way and continues to feel that way at every journey in their life. Like, there are people who might not show you that, but I think we all feel that. And it was like a recent mentor said, everyone has the imposter syndrome. And if you actually take a moment to think, okay, what might people be feeling at any given time, you can actually empathize, and you actually start to realize, wow, like, this is it can be empowering for you to know that, like, everyone has that. There's not a single person who does not experience that at every stage in their life. So I think knowing that you're not alone might be a good thing as a start. And then knowing, like, the key is, I had this Stephen Covey had this great analogy of two circles, a circle of control and circle of influence. And so usually we care about all these things that we can't control, and that's like the larger circle. And the things that we can control is a tiny circle inside the larger circle, and so if you just focus on the things you can control, slowly what happens is that little circle starts to basically grow and grow, and then all the things you were worried about fit inside that tiny circle. What happens is often, like, we only pay attention to the things outside our circle of control, and it stresses us out. But if you focus inward, you'll find that that you can eventually chip away at the thing you're concerned about. Some tools that a founder in their long trip might benefit is, there's the work of becoming good at a skill. That's a known skill. Let's say a hammer, for example. Like learning how to use a hammer and nail is a good skill. But there's also the work that often is that founders need to get good at on their journey, is getting good at knowing when not to use the hammer and nail, right? So like, and that means you have to be an expert not on how to use that, not only on how to use it, but also when it's not a good idea to use it. So what that means is, like, there's a famous saying, like, to every problem, like your all of your problems is a nail to your hammer. Like people just trying to use the same solution for everything they see, or they want every problem they see to be like fitting into their sort of toolbox. So, and you gravitate to those type of problems. And so a founder has to experience problems that they don't have the right tools for. And so understanding how to recognize your situation, it's like, this is not the right tool for this, being an expert on when not to use certain tools that you have already, then understanding how to navigate and just study the landscape of tools. You don't need to be an expert on those tools, but study what other skills you need to be able to achieve your goal, right? And then understanding, wow, I really need someone who's good at this, or maybe I need to go stop and learn this thing. Sometimes you bring people along for your journey this way. Sometimes you decide, okay, I'm going to spend time and learn this because this is critical for my next step. And so that's an important aspect of the journey.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much, Travis. I'm going to switch now to asking a couple of questions that we received prior to the event. Thank you, folks, so much for sending in your questions. We also do have a Q&A box if you want to send in some questions that we don't get answered today. We will have Travis answer them after the event. I hope I didn't just volunteer you there, Travis. I hope you're okay with that.
I'm totally fine with that. Totally fine with that.
Okay, cool. So question from, let's go to a question from Gajan. What are your thoughts on pursuing your startup dream as an entrepreneur while working for a company full-time at the early stages versus devoting your time in full to startup from the beginning?
Gajan, great question. I did that. So if you remember, the first journey as an entrepreneur is, product market fit. And the key currency you have is time. If you can plan for a long journey, if you can get creative in, giving you the time to learn a new space, prototype and test an idea. It's not about how much money you can pour into your business idea, but how much time you can pour into it to learn and try and test. And so the key there is, can you, the scuba gear idea, right? So if you are creative in buying that time, maybe doing a day job, right? That is literally how I started. I was very fortunate. When I did my MBA, I got a $15,000 grant from Queens. And, I remember almost not qualifying for it because they saw that I had a job lined up. And so the associate dean brought me into her office and said, like, so why would we give this to you? Like, there's all these people who are putting their, like, going right into it. And I said, because $15,000 is not going to last long if I'm actually using it for living expenses, but it would last 2 years if I'm using it, like much longer if I'm using it in scrappy ways to test ideas until I can get product market fit. And I'm really committed to this cause. And so it's, when I was doing a full-time job at a bank, when I left the MBA, and I basically finished the MBA, and I basically moved close to the office so that I can commute less. And I also, gave up my other passion, which was I used to do magic shows on the weekend. So I had to put a pause on everything so that I can buy that extra time. At the same time, I also did a good job at the job. So I wasn't working when I was working at the company. Like, like I still keep in touch with a lot of folks from the company. I did get promoted while I was there too, and um, I, I would encourage to like build that reputation even as you're working in the company, and then use your outside your work time that you would use to spend with friends and stuff. That was a sacrifice I made to test and play that thing.
Nice.
Entrepreneurship is a lot of sacrifice. So
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question from Sen. Many people don't see the blood, sweat, and tears of founders when they're building their companies. What's the hardest personal sacrifice you've had to make in building this company now?
yeah, I mean, thank you, Sen, for that question. And the physically, the for me personally, the job had gotten so stressful, especially in the early days, that I actually, um, you know, had eczema. So it started kicking in all over my body, and so it is not for the faint in heart. There was a joke another set of founders and I had about how sometimes it feels like you're in a room and you're drinking coffee and the room's on fire and you're just like everything's fine, or like your skin's on fire. Sometimes it felt that. So it is painful, but often a lot of that is the expectations you put on yourself, and you're worried about failure, or not making it past the next milestone. Often the slightest thing could cause your company to go bankrupt in the early days, and so those are just part and parcel, part of the journey for a founder. And often I found that what's changed, because even as a company grows, stress levels change, the sport changes. It's like going from cricket to baseball now. The sport is changing, but this is a different kind of stress. And so what you end up building along the way is the tools to cope with stress in general. And I think a lot of serial entrepreneurs, when they come back the second time, they don't feel the same stress as the first time, simply because they figured out the coping mechanisms a little bit better. So focus on what you can control. When you're starting a company, play the long game, be creative so that you can sustain the long trip with your loved ones, with you. You're not trying to, hit this out of the park on the first shot, first year or second year. Have the runway and the time to make those decisions, and just focus on what you can control and ignore everyone else in terms of the pressures, right? Just focus on what the customer is doing with your product or solution and see if it's a unique thing that they can't get anywhere else. And these are the key things. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm going to try to get to as many questions as I can in the next 10 minutes. I'm going to kind of pair our questions together. We got a question in our Q&A, and we have a question from Vidishan. Basically, both kind of asking about how do you approach an investor and successfully bring investments into your company? How have you been able to bring investments into your company?
So I thought I was the worst presenter. A lot of technology revolutions, there's this period called the hype curve. And then you go through like past the hype curve. And so I was just starting when the hype curve was taking off, and I was just in the experimental phase. So I saw these ed tech companies and I saw these founders and great presentations and decks and all these tips on how to present. And I thought you had to be a great presenter and wear a hoodie and all that stuff. And I was like, wow, like I'm not those people. I'm not that polished. And I'm fortunate though that having read like Search versus Execute that Bhaskar had sent me and other articles, and starting to surround myself around YouTube videos and people who have built this to focus on the product. And one of the things you do along the way is you try to find people who've done that. And often those people are folks who've built companies who've now exited, or companies are further along and are in a position to mentor. And when they see founders who are doing what they do or the way that they did it, they often are looking to invest in those companies. My first investment, I never explicitly asked him for capital, but I knew that I wanted the mentorship. And often they also make for the best investors. And so
awesome.
yeah, so you don't necessarily, they bet on the person in that. They bet on those. Are you a scuba diver? Are you running the marathon? Do you really have a unique way of bringing things to the market? Even if it's not about how much money, but is it sticky money? in terms of
Okay.
they want to come back. Those are the things that they're looking for. Organically, you'll figure out, they'll ask the questions, and over time, they'll figure out what to do. That's my advice.
Right. That's great advice. If I could get you to expand just briefly, because we have a couple of questions I still want to get to, but I'm getting some other questions about whether you had any challenges when it came to fundraising and how you actually found investors. If you can talk a little bit about that briefly.
Yes, I did. I did have challenges. We had challenges, and where in one example, I had the challenge of I was talking to the wrong category of investors. I was entering pitch competitions, and the folks on the other end had never started a company. So the advice that I was listening online and reading about from folks who had started companies were led to a certain set of questions that I asked myself and tried to answer and build the company towards, but then the questions that were being asked in pitch competition sounded very different. This comes back to the cricket versus baseball. So I was pitching to baseball players when you start a company, you're supposed to pitch to cricket players. And so in many ways, I started to go find, maybe I'm wrong, like what's this like conflict? And I went looking for people who built companies. So, sorry, the question again was?
The questions were around whether you faced any challenges as a minority, and then also about how did you go out and find investors?
So,
exactly.
Right. So one thing that helped was, figuring out who to pitch to, who to talk to. And I wasn't necessarily pitching, because when you find the right person, you do put together a deck, but that's not the be all end all. It's meeting people, getting the mentorship, getting the conversations going. It's a long form interview of what are you doing along the way, and as you're building, what does it look like? And those folks end up becoming the ones you eventually say, I'd like to invest. Can you put together a presentation for me of the overall picture? That's the general process for pitching. And so finding the right one is the first problem, and that's find the cricket players, the founders, to like former founders of other companies. They're the right people to pitch to. The second thing is, sorry, my kid and my wife are playing in the background, so you're gonna hear noise. The second thing is when you are going to get to that point where you hit product market fit, and you are actually now talking to investors, angel investors, to raise capital, you are basically making a plan to execute on that capital, to spend it in certain ways. And that means timelines are being formulated and deadlines. And so if you pitch to one investor and they say they're going to write a check for you, and they want to go through a process of DD, but at the end they don't write that check, or they delay it a year out, 2 years, that's dangerous. I experienced a little bit of that. And one of the things you have to do is, I learned from that. I said, the next time I shake someone's hand, I'll have multiple investors lined up who shook my hand and go through that process of DD, so that if anyone falls out, my plans don't get impacted negatively. So that's one of the things that you should do also when you're pitching, is to cultivate multiple conversations with mentors and advisors who've had this experience. And then when the time comes, I'm going to formally pitch, you have multiple people who are interested, so that your plans doesn't get impacted because if a few people change their mind.
I knew this was going to happen during this day. I was like, I'm going to mute myself one day. And it's anyway, sorry guys. I have a question now from Abhishek. I think Abhishek had actually is from Paris. I think he was in our chat group. So thank you for joining us from Paris, Abhishek. His question is, how much does environment matter? It's like the conditions that you're living in, the facilities, your access to knowledge, your family's push. How much do those things matter when you want to be an entrepreneur? You want to create a product, things like that?
The environment. So, I mean, there's different ways I can answer this. So I'll answer it in this way. I think the range of companies are so broad and vast, across so many industries. I would say the process is like building a company. Like, think of founders like birds, right? There are different kinds of birds out there. There's ostriches that thrive on dry, arid land with strong legs that can run, but they can't fly like hawks that often live in mountaintops, or swim like penguins that can go into cold waters and dive deep into oceans. And so a founder often sometimes feels like, wow, like look at that industry, or look at that area, or look at that neighborhood, that, you know, like Silicon Valley versus, Toronto, or versus or Sri Lanka, or wherever. And I think the best thing a founder can do is, today, because of internet, we have access to a lot of knowledge. We have access to a lot of information at our fingertips. Take advantage of that, of course, but not carry with you. If you're staring at a penguin in Silicon Valley, but you're out in Sri Lanka and you should be looking at ostriches, or you're out in Toronto and you should be looking at hawks. Like, don't take with you everything that you see from these other areas, right? Look at your area, look at your customers, and look at companies and founders in your neighborhoods and your areas. And they don't have to be the next generation of companies and technology. They could be business owners from the previous generation who can coach and mentor you on their process and how to look at their markets. Look at the previous companies that your customers purchased from. Learn from the people who started those companies. My general advice is to try to learn the processes that are common across all birds, across all founders and all markets, but then focus on your market, and only you will know how it's going to work for you, and focus on people in the area. Uh, when you
That's
don't
good.
do that, it's like backseat driving. I don't know if you've ever experienced when your parents are in the back and they're telling you to go on the left turn. When you don't do that, you're letting other people drive your car, and you have to drive the car.
Okay. I have room for one more question, and then we do have to wrap it up. This has been such an incredible session. And folks, just remember, if your question wasn't answered, that Travis will have some time to answer it a bit later. This is from Jack Shannon, a question about how does a country market expansion work for startups? Can you talk about the process of validation, scaling, and onboarding customers from another country?
This is a really great question. After you achieve product markets fit, one of the first mistakes founders make, because when you go through product market fit, you act like a scientist. You're always doubting, oh, maybe I have to change it. Maybe I'm wrong. Try another thing. So you're constantly in this mode of self-doubt and testing and throwing away things and trying again. So you're wired like a scientist. So when you go through product market fit and you have these like customers and they're there, and now you have to do what they call sales and marketing. So your brain immediately says, I'm not an expert in that, because that's one of the things founders do, immediately identify an area that they've never done. So then you go and find sales and marketing folks. One advice to founders is, it turns out, I had gone through this journey and made this mistake where we brought in marketing experts and sales experts who are, from agencies and other places to just kind of tell us like how to scale a product once you have success. And there's a lot of great information here from their processes like pilots. But what I needed to do, and I learned quickly, was also even sales and marketing folks. There are people who were sales and marketing folks in early companies, like the one that we had, who had just started. And then there's sales and marketing folks in large companies that already are well-known brands and are scaling out further. So there's some momentum that they had. And so I immediately went looking for the sales and marketing folks who were there at the very beginning when the company wasn't well known. And when I did this, one of the things I found was the skills to build those ideas and campaigns and things to sort of promote your product actually are the same skills that you use to build the product, which often the founder is really well equipped to help lead. And so all in the early days of starting a company, once you hit product market fit and customers want to come back and use your product, and it's slowly scaling, all you have to do for marketing and sales is think of those as also products and services. And you build these really interesting products and services that you subsidize, you give away for free, that lead people into thinking or having conversations, evaluating what is essentially your actual product. I'll give you a simple example. Amazon is when you go to Amazon.com, you can actually, it has the world's largest catalog, and the catalog itself is a product that you're getting away for free. Like they're giving it away, and you don't have to sign up. You can search all these products and product reviews. That is a founder's skill, to build a catalog, and that's actually a marketing effort. So if you think about when you get to that stage, just know to talk to founders who've gotten to that stage, and just know not to have self-doubt that even that is required. Even that is a founder's activity, and that many people are equipped to do that if they already did the first piece. And talk to people who are, who've done sales and marketing in early stage companies, and you'll find that it's a lot less stressful to do. And that's essentially what we've done. And then, when we go into other markets now, what we do is we have these huge media events and experiences with thought leaders from each of those markets, both live events. We have a media house and we have a consulting house. And this helps bring those conversations and create value in those markets with the right local experts, who then also help us regionalize our product and also introduce it to the clients. And so we create this huge thing around the buyer's journey, but it's just an extended number of products and services that lead to the ultimate evaluation of your product and purchase.
Awesome. Travis, what an honor it was for me to chat with you and have this opportunity through Aravanai. Thank you so much. I think a lot of people, there's still so many questions, so you're going to have a great afternoon answering some questions. But thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm going to pass it now to Larissa to give us a vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Before I get to final conclusions, thank you both, Travis and Kirthana, for this discussion. I just wanted to quickly highlight our representative from Articulate. They're our social media partners. They were absolutely amazing during this entire process for all our discussions. So just before I conclude this discussion, I'm going to hand it off to Enosh.
Hey, thanks, Melissa. It's not a presentation. I'm just going to give a quick intro, but Travis and Kirthana, what an amazing session. It was just amazing. I think, Travis, I feel like I read 10 books during this session. and your examples and analogies is just crazy, super crazy. So I have the pleasure of introducing Articulate. So what we do is we pretty much, we take out all the amazing stories from Sri Lanka, the startup entrepreneurs and founder stories from Sri Lanka. We take it out to Asia. I mean, we've been doing this for quite some time now, almost closing to 8 years. But we've been only narrating the startup stories within Sri Lanka. But recently we thought that it needs a larger exposure, and now we are taking it to Asia. And then how Rajan calls it, we are probably the TechCrunch of Asia. A long way to go, but that's what we are aiming for. Thank you, Melissa, Rajan, and the amazing team behind Aravanai. Thank you for inviting us to be a part of this initiative. Thank you, Melissa. Over to you.
Thank you for having me, everyone. It was
okay. Thank you, Eno.
Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, before I let everyone go, on behalf of Aravanai, we are beyond grateful to even witness this discussion. Thank you, Kirthana and Travis, for setting up the bar high. Sunday morning discussion, and Travis, you were absolutely amazing with your analogies and examples. We would love to also thank our social media, Asia, CTPA, and all the Canadian Tamil Student Associations. They were a big part of our turnout today. We would also love to give for making a impact through entertainment. As you heard, they were our music this morning from Madja. And last but not least, we would all like to thank the entire audience for writing down your questions and tuning in. We tried our very best to include them in this discussion. I'm going to responses for Travis, and then hope to see you guys again for the third discussion in April. Thank you, guys.